Hello. So, just for the record, I have been sitting in front of this camera looking at this green light for well over 2.5 hours, and it is, well, I don't want to say exhausting because that's a bit of an exaggeration, but it is. Um, well, it's an awkward 3 or so hours, but well worth it if these lectures are heard by you and are of use to you. So in that spirit, I'm going to continue talking about Twelfth Night and marriage. Before I go into, in the last lecture on marriage in the play, I talked about um, Olivia, right, and what she finds fascinating about falling in love with Cesario or Viola, right? It's like falling in love with herself and falling in love with the theories and the ideas that she has fed herself about love and intimacy. Now, before I go into what would seem the organic second part of the conversation, which would be Viola or Cesario, I want to talk about Malvolio, because Malvolio fantasizes about falling in love with and marrying Olivia, right? And it's a sort of theory that he is trying to break out of, right? I mean, the theory of marriage is that it occurs among those that are of similar ilk, right? That they belong together. And as we had talked about this in earlier conversations in and out of class, belonging together was a very materially determined characteristic, right? It was not that, oh, our souls are going to meld together and make one or something like that. This was not a delusional, romantic period, although it is pushing, and I would say Shakespeare's drama is symptomatic of that push toward a sort of modern idealization of marriage, right? Healthy or unhealthy, however we want to determine it is where soulmates are the rhetoric of soulmates and soulmateness, soulmatehood, is what is presented above and before the material likeness, which, of course, in the early modern period would have been the primary function of a successful marriage alongside reproduction, which was also materially determined, as useful, as necessary. But not only that, it was also a very frank positioning of matrimony being successful between people if the material universes that they brought together was propelled into the future, right? So the reproductive futurity and the material futurity that come together in a well-matched pair was more important than, more important to present as such than to sort of water it down. Yeah, I'm going to say that. Than to water it down in other rhetorics, including those of love, right? But of course, I mean, in Shakespeare's time, we begin to see that the material ramifications and the rhetoric of material material lucrativeness that marriage affords becomes increasingly ageist, right? That the elderly, the older man usually is the one that is going to talk about marriage as a material condition and a materially determined institution. And of course, the younger lover figures are the ones who really absorb the pleasure and the erotic rhetoric as being the cause, right? As being the cause worthy of transgression, right? And marriage is the thing that comes from the transgressive moments being successful, being lauded or appreciated by those who have some sort of power, magical or earthly. So we've seen this happening, and I think in Malvolio we see not the Aegeus figure, right, strangely, but a figure who thinks of marriage materially, right, who thinks of marriage as a practical way to solidify his future, right? His own future. And this is where he's different to, say, the father figures that we've seen in the other plays. Malvolio understands, then, to go back to the first point I was trying to make, and that point has kind of perhaps disappeared in the other conversation that I kind of rambled into. But Malvolio is aware of the fact that there are conventions, that he's not supposed to marry the countess, right? Because he's a steward. And yet he has ambitions, right? And he says there's precedence. There are other people who have married beyond their class parameters, right? Beyond what is convention and conventionally permissible to them. So if they have done it, why not he? So let's look at how Malvolio imagines his marriage, right? And let's look at what he thinks might be a hindrance or what he thinks might be a possibility. Because in him we see a sort of blurring of both fantasy and possibility, right? So I would like us to consider his point of view, if you will, in marriage as it appears in Twelfth Night. So this is Act 2, Scene 5, very famous prank scene in the play. Enter Malvolio, around line 20 or 21, right? "'Tis but fortune, all is fortune. Maria once told me she did affect me, and I've heard herself come thus near, that should she fancy it should be one of my complexion." Now, note this is a sort of textual crux. Maria once told me she did affect me. Now, she could mean Maria, right? Like in the grammatical context, it could be Maria. It should be Maria if we think about it. But it could also be that he is referring to Olivia, right? And Maria once said that Olivia liked him, right? And that he heard her come really close to saying that once is what the other thing could be. So Maria once told me she did affect me, and I have heard herself come thus near. And the herself is where we start thinking that's who he's talking about. He's not talking about Maria liking him. He's talking about Maria saying that Olivia likes him, and Olivia herself said it once, or came very near to saying that. Besides, she uses me with a more exalted respect than anyone else that follows her. What should I think on't? We hear other people ridicule him to articulate how pissed off they are at the audacity of the steward, right? So that's how Satobi puts forth his anger and contempt, to be Count Malvolio. There is example for it. The lady of the stray key married the yeoman of the wardrobe. And then he gets into fantasy, right? So there is possibility, there is precedence, and then his dream begins, right? He starts dreaming of his ideal vision. Think of how Viola and Olivia kind of share the trope of the lover, the lover who is so pained by his own experience of love and loving unrequitedly that, just that pain and articulation of the pain, the visible affects of that pain render the lover vulnerable and welcoming of the love, right? So they share the vision of a male lover suffering. Here, Malvolio shares his vision of himself, only it's not a suffering at all, right? His world has been transformed because love has yielded marriage, and all the material changes that have been afforded him as a result of the marriage make him a much happier, much wealthier Malvolio figure. Malvolio, not a Malvolio figure, a Malvolio, good God. So he has slipped into dreamscape or into fantasy now, right? Into the idealized vision that he needs to construct, because there isn't precedence for this, right? What we see is we see the fantasy, we see the idealized vision of love as presented because of souls connecting and people harrowing over one another. We don't see this idealized vision of richness. And that's what he's going to write. So his fantasy is, having been 3 months married to her, sitting in my state, calling my officers about me in my branched velvet gown. Think of all the material ramifications of the marriage that he's fantasizing about, right? I mean, it's not, oh, and she loves me and she's writing sonnets for me. None of that crap. He's talking velvet gowns. He's talking about sitting in his state. He has got all these servants and officers about him. Having come from a day bed where I have left Olivia sleeping. Right, and this is the first slipping in of some sort of sexual event that might have transpired between husband and wife. And of course, Toby can have, his ears are burning, right? Fire and brimstone. Peace. Says Fabian. Malvolio continues dreaming and fantasizing, and then to have the humor of state. And after a demure travel of regard, telling them I know my place, as I would they should do theirs. To ask for my kinsman Toby, right? Now he is no longer Olivia's kinsman. He is now, that is he being so Toby, is now Malvolio's kinsman. And this is a sort of transgressive class conversation that Malvolio's inserted into the play, right? I mean, what does this mean for Sir Toby? The guy's a drunk, the guy's quite honestly a bit of a douchebag. I did apologize in an early lecture for my use of foul language, and I had explained why it is necessary, in my estimation, to vandalize language, to remain theoretically aware of the fact that language is not the sterile thing. So I won't go into another apology, but there we go. For those that are taken a bit aback by the saltiness of words, please do accept my apology. I will continue talking about Malvolio and go into the other characters and other marriages very soon.